How are you doing today? I hope you're not sucking bad air. So, we're going to talk about respiration now. And I pulled up this model, diagram of a model that people make to demonstrate how lungs work. And we basically have a bell, a glass bell, with a stopper and a hole at the top that represents your pharynx or your trachea. Um, and on the bottom we have the two lungs, which are represented by balloons. And then we have a bladder or a drum uh, membrane to represent your diaphragm. When you make this chest cavity, this is a model chest cavity, but when you make it larger by pulling down on the diaphragm, or when that muscle contracts, air rushes in because the pressure inside, you'll notice this is a closed chamber, just like your chest is a closed chamber. The pressure inside is lowered, and the pressure outside is higher now than what's inside, and down it comes. And that experience that you have of feeling that you're sucking air in or breathing in is caused by a differential in pressure, air pressure, between the inside of your chest and the outside of the environment. But when the muscle relaxes, as in this diagram, this means the pressure inside is higher because we've reduced the size of the space for the same amount of air, and that causes these lungs or balloons to deflate, and the air pushes out and you exhale. So this is inhalation, this is exhalation. So let's take a look at the anatomy of this. The intercostal muscles, and we'll look at these again, are one group of muscles, that means the muscles between the ribs, that contract, that pull the ribs away from the midline, that increases the size of the chest cavity, and therefore the size of the space in which the lungs are set. That is one of the muscles that does that. Let's take a look at the next muscle that does that also. And that muscle is going to be the diaphragm. I wanted to look at this diagram because it's easiest to see in a diagram right now. The diaphragm is actually a dome-shaped muscle. And when it contracts, it flattens out, basically pulls down, and as these intercostal muscles in the ribs out here are expanding the chest cavity laterally, the diaphragm is pulling down and expanding it in that direction. So that makes the cavity much larger. Okay, so the Biodigital Human is a program that I recommend you get. If you have Flash and everything on your computer. You will not be able to get it for the iPad. I don't think anyway, unless you are using a separate browser for your iPad. But anyway, so we have the Biodigital Human, and you can see that I can move it all around. But we're going to do something a little different here. I'm going to look at the muscular system so that we can look at, and we're going to look there. We can look at the breathing muscles, and we want to look at the muscles of the thorax. Okay, so here we are with the thorax, but we really can't see the muscles that deal with breathing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, gives you the toolbar up, well, you can't see it, it's above, but it's like a pen, and you click on it and you get this toolbar, and dissect is right here. So if I click on dissect, I can take that muscle off, and that was the pectoralis major, and I'm going to take off also the external oblique, and I'm going to take off also the rectus abdominis, and I know you learned the names of all those muscles when you had A&P 1. So this should not be strange to you. Now what we're looking at is the muscles between the ribs, the intercostals. These are the ones that contract to expand the chest cavity. Now I want to look at this muscle here where you see the blue X called the diaphragm. From this view, it's hard to see that it's a dome-like structure, but I'm going to turn this thing. Nope, I don't want to do that. I want to dissect. I want to turn this thing so you can look up in there. And I'm going to twist it around a little bit so you can see that we're really looking at a muscle that's a big dome-like structure. That's your diaphragm. Diaphragm separates the abdominal cavity from the thoracic cavity. So when the diaphragm contracts, it pulls down, it gets smaller, so it pulls down from this dome-like position and gets flatter at the same time that the intercostals are spreading out, and so you will breathe in because the air pressure outside is higher than the inside. Okay, so I want to review this with you with a different interactive object here that's from Wisconsin Online. Okay, so we have the basic setup with the lungs. We've got a diagram here showing the pulmonary circuit from the heart. So the deoxygenated blood comes into the lungs through the pulmonary artery. Arteries move away from the heart, gets rid of CO2, picks up oxygen, comes back to the left side of the heart, where it then can be pumped through the aorta going up here and then down into the rest of the body. So first thing, what happens? External respiration, gas exchange between the alveoli of the lungs and the blood. Some of the air that you inhaled, which is in your alveoli, your air sacs, in other words, in your lungs now, will now enter your bloodstream. Okay, so here's the alveoli, and the end of these bronchioles and so forth inside your lungs. These air sacs is another term for the alveoli, is air sacs. All right. High levels of carbon dioxide are in the blue blood, the deoxygenated blood coming from your heart. And when it gets to these air sacs, CO2 leaves the blood and you can exhale it out while, and at the same time, of course, O2 is picked up by the blood. So you think of the blood cells with the hemoglobin as little trains, and they carry the oxygen around. They pick up oxygen, go out in the tissue, dump it, and come back and pick up oxygen again. Okay, so this is the circuit. Oxygen is transported by the hemoglobin in your red cells, while carbon dioxide is primarily transported as a bicarbonate ion. This process is known as gas transport. It also involves, and you'll read about this in your book, Henry's Law. And Henry's Law basically says that when there is enough pressure and there is a liquid adjacent to a gas, the gas will dissolve into the liquid depending upon, in relation to the amount of partial pressure that exists in the gas. So here's what happens in this interactive. We're seeing very rapidly what's happening. Carbon dioxide is being dumped out. So this is the air sac. This is the artery or the capillaries in the air sac. So oxygen's jumping onto the hemoglobin and CO2 is jumping out of the plasma back into the air sacs so that you can breathe it out. That's what's happening. Okay, so you breathe in and then you breathe out. But we're looking specifically at the gas exchange. So on this side we have the tissues in your lung or in your body really, and the CO2 is being produced by your cells and then is being dissolved in the interstitial fluid, and it moves from there into your plasma by diffusion. Remember diffusion? This is purely by diffusion. High levels of CO2 here, low levels here, so it moves into the plasma. Oxygen is on this red cell. It's high in density in the capillaries, in the oxygenated blood, and it moves rapidly through the membrane, through the interstitial fluid, and into the cells. CO2 moves out of the cells. It's a waste product. Oxygen is the fire that you need to burn food, and it goes into the cells. So we can go down and look at the other side of it in the lung, okay? So in the lung, we've got CO2 in the plasma. We've got CO2 also in the cytoplasm of the red cell. And that CO2, when it gets to the lung, is at real high densities inside the capillary, in the cell and in the plasma. And it moves rapidly through these membranes and interstitial fluid into the air sac. From the air sacs, the highly oxygenated air pushes oxygen by diffusion into the plasma and then into the hemoglobin, or into the red cell, where it jumps onto the hemoglobin. So the red cell, think of it as a choo-choo train, one of the cars on the choo-choo train, and it goes around in a circle, picks up the oxygen, and then up here it shows where it dumps it off. So here the oxygen is going to the tissues, carbon dioxide going into the capillaries, into the blood, and when the capillaries bring that blood into the lungs, carbon dioxide is going out into the air sacs, oxygen is coming in. And that's what happens. Okay, those last diagrams were from page 833 in your textbook, your electronic textbook that is. I simply clicked on these to expand their size so that you could see them better. I also suggest that you watch Paul Anderson's video on the respiratory system. That will give you a little bit better idea of how ours compares with other respiratory systems that certain other animals have, and especially aquatic animals. And it also reviews the pulmonary loop and how blood is transported around the body to get oxygen to the cells and to get rid of CO2 waste. Here's a picture of the video, and it's could be confused with his other videos on respiration, which is the chemical aspect of respiration. And I want to mention that real quickly while we're here. The terms respiration and breathing tend to be used synonymously, and what we're really looking at in this video and in this week is breathing. Respiration I consider to be cellular respiration, which is the burning of oxygen in the Krebs cycle to produce ATP in the cells. But because it is by convention, the term respiration is used to reflect breathing. Breathing is actually the mechanical thing that we do with our muscles to get air into the lungs, and the gas exchange then happens to get oxygen to the tissues and carbon dioxide away from the tissues, and all that's involved with breathing. And I don't really consider that to be respiration, but we do use the terms interchangeably, so don't be confused by that, because on a quiz you might be asked about respiration, and it may be referring to cellular respiration, which is the Krebs cycle producing ATP, and it's a biochemical process.